Man, I'm just so tired of hearing stories like this. One of the things that is important to understand is that when it comes to church hurt, many people try to write it off as, oh, somebody was just talked to a certain way in the church and they just need to get over it. Or, that person is just not strong enough in their connection with God. People are going to be people. And so we make so many excuses before we even hear their stories. And one of the things that's very important is this story right here. And I've seen it plenty of times now, just watching it over and over again. And I've heard these stories, and not even just our church, but in a lot of churches. And the problem is that these type of things tend to go and be put under cover because of the prominence of the person or what that person has to contribute to the organization or to save face. And I think we have to stop trying to save face and start saving children. But I'll let you watch for yourself.
Hurt and pain, more than half a century old.
But what I didn't realize then, that when something like that happens to you, you never, ever forget.
Betrayed as children, failed still as men.
Just hold your hands up and say, we knew what was going on. Andrew, we're so sorry, that we didn't believe you.
Michael Smith arrived in West London with his family in 1960.
I just wanted to pause here and say it's important for us to treat every accusation seriously. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we are as pastors are mandatory reporters. And so anytime we hear something about a child, it's not about going and asking or the person if they did it, or having a family meeting with the person, or investigating for ourselves. It's actually required by law here in the States that we go report it. And so once you get the report, you are a mandatory reporter. Go report it and let the authorities do the investigation.
1964. He was 11 years old. A strange country, a hostile new home. He says with other immigrant families from the Caribbean, they gravitated towards the church.
It was the time of the mods and the rockers and the teddy boys and the chains and the motorbikes. Westerns at the time really went out on their own for fear of being attacked by one of the gangs. So the church was seen as a safe place for Afro-Caribbeans at the time. And it was definitely a safe place for me.
While the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Chiswick offered the children fun and friendship, for parents it was something much more serious. Hope and aspiration. Donald Kelly, the embodiment of it all.
There weren't very many black role models at the time for parents to point you towards, but for Donald Kelly as a doctor, as a physician at Oxford, if you could be like him, that was good.
Donald Kelly knew the power his standing in the church gave him. We've spoken to multiple men who say he used it to abuse them when they were boys. He'd studied at Oxford. He was an accomplished preacher and musician. Parents endlessly invited him into their homes and handed their children into his care without a second thought.
Can I just say this? Oftentimes, abusers don't have a big sign on their chest or on their forehead saying, I'm an abuser. Most of the times, they are people who are very charismatic. They are people that have a lot of talent, skills. They are very sanguine. If you know anything about personality types, they're outgoing, they're outspoken, and they have to have an image or an alternate image that portrays to the people of the world so that they can hide what they're doing behind the scenes. And so we as a church have to be less trusting of just people that we don't know, do our due diligence, and make sure we're not putting people who are harmful in close proximity to our kids.
Looking back, he knew how to groom people. And so during one summer holiday, he came to my mother's house and asked me to accompany him to Oxford to show around the university. And my mother thought, yeah, great. He took me around the university, showed me the operating theatres during the day, and then in the evening, he booked us into a bed and breakfast.
As Michael slept, he says Donald Kelly got into bed beside him and began to abuse him. Just 15, it would be years before Michael would name it as that. Still now in his 70s, so difficult to talk about.
And let me just say this as well. You see how this man who's now in his 70s is still struggling from that encounter as a boy. And one of the things that, we talk about as we preach love, as we preach, the gospel, as we preach Jesus, when we don't take care of people like this, these type of feelings, this type of trauma lasts for ages. And what that means is that it's even harder for people to get reconnected to God because someone who was supposed to be godly did something that was very ungodly to them. And so we have to take these things seriously, because if we're really about saving souls, we have to help also preserve the souls that are in our congregations.
In the middle of the night, I felt strange. I thought I was dreaming. Somebody's hand was on my trousers, my pajama trousers, and I thought. But in the morning, I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything. So I was ashamed. I didn't tell anybody else in my family. Didn't tell my dad. Didn't tell my mother. Up to this day, I haven't told my mother.
Donald Kelly abused Michael in the late 60s. What Michael didn't know then was that he'd abused boys before and would go on to abuse others. Andrew Cadogan was abused almost a decade later, but the tactics exactly the same.
One day he came to my parents and he said, I'm going to Oxford if Andrew would like to come along. I'm thinking, great, when I go back to school, I could tell my friends, I did during the summer, I went to Oxford University.
But the trip, which 14-year-old Andrew had hoped he would be able to boast about to friends, became something which would shame him for years.
I really hope we're not still doing this, parents. Do not allow your child to go one-on-one with an adult, because you really don't know who that adult is behind closed doors. Make sure that they're in a group. Make sure that there's multiple kids or multiple adults, and make sure that there was somebody responsible so that these things don't happen.
In their shared room at the B&B on the very first night, Donald Kelly got into bed beside him.
The lights went off like that, and the man just jumped on me. I was like, what the hell's... So I curled up in the fetus position, and it was like basically he got onto me as though I was his possession. You belong to me. That's how it felt, grabbing, this is mine, this is mine.
In the morning, Andrew says Kelly acted as if nothing had happened, suggesting they go out, that they go to pray. In a strange city, reliant on his abuser to get him home, Andrew says he was trapped.
Do you see how this confusion can really cause a huge rift between somebody and God? You just abused somebody the night before. You just touched them in inappropriate ways. And now the next thing you're saying is, let's go pray in the morning. That cognitive dissonance is real. People are really, their spirits are divided. And I think one of the things we have to understand is that, this type of harm, once again, takes so long to recover from. And this is one of the reasons why I speak often about church hurt.
For the remaining nights of the trip, Kelly did exactly the same again.
My mum, she came home from work, she looked at me, she went, oh, how was your trip? The first thing I said to her was, Mum, if this man, I couldn't even mention his name, if this man came to take Paul, Jeffrey or Peter anywhere, they're my younger brothers, I said, do not allow him, do not allow him. I took my towel out there and went to a shower, had a shower, because I'm thinking, oh man, I need to wash all this man's hands off me, because it still felt as though his hands were still on me.
Fear was to stalk the boys in the shape of Kelly himself, turning up at their houses constantly or coming to find them when they were out.
One of my friends said to me, Andrew, that man's looking at you. I went, which man? He goes, that man over there. So I looked, he was standing there, looking at me playing football with a big smirk on his face.
Michael says some of the boys were called to a meeting by a prominent member of the church and close ally of Kelly, who warned them to stay silent.
So at the end of the meeting,
Imagine that, an adult warning kids to be quiet about what has happened to them. I don't know about you, but that just really angers me that we care more about a friend or a colleague instead of the kids that are vulnerable in their care. And that just makes me to think maybe that person, that friend of Donald Kelly, was also an abuser himself.
when everybody spoke, and then that's when he said, look, if I hear any of you saying this, you'll have me to deal with.
From the 70s onwards, Donald Kelly travelled extensively, Papua New Guinea, Jamaica, Africa, often working for Adventist-run institutions or on medical missions.
And remember, drink a lot of water.
See, when we don't put a stop to this, it now spreads. Look at this guy. He's been all over the world and definitely probably perpetuating the harm in now many different countries. And that's why it's important, as soon as we hear these allegations, to go ahead and report it so that future children are not harmed.
Drink a lot of water for everything.
By 2009, after continuing to hear accounts of Kelly's abuse, Michael spoke to the Metropolitan Police. The police report showing he'd explicitly told them Kelly was still a danger to children. Although no further action was taken in his case, the Met confirmed to us they did contact the Seventh-day Adventist Church about his allegations. We've seen evidence the church was told about Kelly's abuse on a number of occasions dating back decades. In 1994, when Kelly was removed from his post at an Adventist university in Mexico after complaints from students. By the Met after Michael's complaint in 2009. In 2020, one of the most senior pastors in the UK was informed in writing Donald Kelly was a predatory paedophile. Then 2 years later, ministers from the government in Sierra Leone, where Kelly was still working, raised concerns with the church replying they were unaware of allegations against Donald Kelly. Andrew says a severe stroke, while leaving him physically disabled, finally...
Now, I do want to say this. Some people may not understand the organization and the structure of the Adventist Church. It is very compartmentalized into many different, we have the General Conference, they have divisions, they have, unions and so on and so forth. And so sometimes it is hard for information to go from one place in the world to another, but it's not impossible. And so one of the things that we have to understand is that once these allegations ring to be true, instead of trying to cover it up, it's important to make sure that there's communication between the different parts of the world so that these things don't happen. So I can see how that could happen in our structure where, the church may say that they don't know based on one department not necessarily having close communication with another, but that's definitely not an excuse, and it's definitely not impossible to improve that mode of communication.
Freed him to speak out. Even friends had accused him of lying as a child. He went to the police in February 2022.
The policeman sat there after the interview. He looked at me. He said to me, goes, I believe you. I was so embarrassed to tell a man what was going down. Anyway, he looked at me, he said, I believe you.
What was it like when he said, I believe you?
Like a weight off my chest, you know what I mean? I actually looked at him and I said, no, thank you. It was great that another man could say, I believe you.
Do you know how hard it is for a young man, a boy, to say that he has been taken advantage of by another man? I mean, just imagine the different responses that he would receive. People will question his sexuality. People may question his toughness. People might question so many things about him. So it's hard for a young man to come out and say this. And imagine, this man right here, who's clearly an old man, once he was able to file that report and have somebody tell him that he believed him, another man. See how important and powerful that is, that it brought him to tears. And so this is how much weight, this is how much heaviness people are carrying when we don't believe them, when we don't take their accusations seriously. I don't care who it is. Report it and let them do the investigation. If it's a false accusation, guess what? They'll find out. But if there's credibility, we'll save children. And that should be one of the top priorities of each and every individual church.
But being believed didn't mean getting justice. Donald Kelly was interviewed voluntarily by police, who told Andrew there wasn't enough evidence to take any further action.
And your thoughts results in feelings.
In that same year, a group of victims, including Michael Smith, began pressing the church to finally act against Kelly, raising a formal complaint. But soon after, Donald Kelly died of cancer, buried as he lived, lauded by the church. It wasn't until February 2023 that the church agreed to commission an independent investigation. But 18 months on, despite repeated requests to the church's leadership, not one of the victims has yet been allowed to see what it has found.
See, that's the problem. The first accusation, I think, was 1993. I don't know. I might have been but that's over 31 years that he's been able to just run free. And then fortunately for him, right, but unfortunately for the victims, before he could even face or be accountable for his actions, he passes away. But the thing about it is the church, it says in 2023, started investigating, but they said they would share their findings according to this video, and they have not shared it yet with the victims. And that is another negligence that I feel like needs to be addressed, because these people need closure. The death of the man does not bring closure, but actually being acknowledged, people being told that they are believed, people's truths being revealed, especially after they've been carrying this whole time and people have been discrediting their claims and they've been scared by that one man who said, "You'll have to deal with me." Like, this is ridiculous. Like, let them know what's going on, what the findings is, help them to feel validated so that they can heal from this and move on. Otherwise, you're going to continue to lose people in your churches because of foolishness like this.
In a statement today released through lawyers, the trustees of the South England Conference of Seventh-day Adventists said they had only learned about allegations against Donald Kelly in 2021. They said the SEC recognises the appalling and lasting harm that Donald Kelly caused and extends its deepest and heartfelt sympathy to all who've been affected by his abusive conduct. We are appalled that this one man's actions have caused so much suffering to so many people, adding that it takes safeguarding reports extremely seriously and it is reflecting carefully on the lessons to be learned.
And see, I don't like this statement because we always try to isolate. Oh, it's one man's thing. Oh, it's just one bad apple. But the actual reality is that the system did not allow avenues for people to be believed with their accusations. And so to distance yourself from any type of accountability is ridiculous. Because if anything happens in my church, guess what? I am accountable. And so I have to figure out, I have to apologize. I have to figure out what's going on, and I have to do things to make sure it never happens again. But it happened under my care. How dare me say, oh, that was just one man's actions. And that just continues to create deeper wounds for the people when they hear that, when it wasn't just one man that abused them, but it was a whole congregation and a whole bunch of people that did not believe them. Take accountability.
The church also told us that its trustees are carefully considering the report from independent investigators and would be contacting victims, sharing the findings with them as soon as legally possible, but gave no sense of when that might be.
Donald Kelly hurt you in the most terrible way, but the church has also hurt you, you would say, in terms of how they've dealt with this.
You go to church for good things, to have a good time, to be comforted. You've been called the N-word and this, you've been spat at school. When you go to church, hey, this is where you go for resolution, for comfort, for the oil of healing, as it were, and the church. But you find the church, the higher church, the people in charge of the church, they are sometimes colluding together to protect the fair name of the church rather than practicing what they preach.
You're in no doubt that
That right there is a problem. Protecting an image. That is what's getting a lot of churches in trouble, because they want to protect an image when it's so much better to be transparent. People are so much more willing to forgive and to applaud your transparency and your quickness to action, as opposed to sweeping things under the rug. And that's the church hurt that, I talk about. Is not just the offense, but it's also the non-believing when an offense has happened. And so we have to do better. And we cannot allow these things, especially to be covered up or to try to preserve the name of the church. Because when we try to preserve the name of the church, we actually do injustice to the name of God.
had the church acted sooner, you would never have been abused.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm angry with them. I mean, I haven't even read the report about me. I need the report. The church are holding on to it. Where's my justice? You know what I mean? I don't get it. I really don't get it, Where's my justice?
But there will be no justice against an abuser now gone. The truth is what the men ask for. An acknowledgement they weren't lying, that their church let them down, and a promise it will never make the same mistakes again.
So I just want to say to that person who has gone through something similar like this might be triggering to you, and I did not want to make sure that this is re-traumatizing you. But I do want you to hear that not every person in the church and organization is going to handle things this way. Your story needs to be heard. Your story needs to be believed. And in appropriate cases, your story needs to be prosecuted to make sure that those people who have done this to you are held accountable in the courts of law. And so I just want to encourage us, when I talk about this thing called church hurt, there is so many levels to this, but ultimately, what it does, it drives people away from a relationship with God. And so I need you to understand the importance of this. We are here to continue to try to reach people through the gospel and the love of Jesus Christ. But it's very unloving to allow stuff like this to happen within our congregations. And as soon as we hear about it, to try to cover it up and preserve the name of the church. That is of the utmost, most foolish stupidity. And I'm sorry to use strong words, but it's dumb, and I think we need to stop. And so I'm just asking us to stop doing all this foolish behavior. What do you think God will say when it comes to that point where we're sitting in front of him before his judgment seat, and he's asking us, what about these children that were supposed to be in your care? What are we going to tell him then? Because I remember there's a scripture in the word that says, if anyone brings harm to these little children, it's better that a millstone be wrapped around his neck and he be thrown into the bottom of the sea. That doesn't sound like we're going to go to heaven if we continue to allow and excuse and cover up these injustices to our young people. And so I just want to say I'm sorry to anyone who has experienced anything similar to this. Sorry is not enough, but I want you to know that you're believed, that there's time. Still go out and prosecute these situations so that you can get your justice. And I just hope that we as a church take more accountability for what happens within our walls. Thank you once again for joining me for another edition of Religion and Politics. My name is Wale Ade. I am a pastor, and I hope that we take better care of the people that God has placed in our care. God bless.